I stood in the center of my custom-built, $960,000 home. The living room was filled with the soft murmur of my colleagues, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the warm glow of recessed lighting. But all I could focus on was my mother, Sarah, smiling a cold, calculating smile. Beside her stood my older brother, Elijah, looking around my house like he was at an open house, mentally measuring the walls for his own furniture. "You're single, Matthew," my mother said, her voice dripping with that familiar, sickening entitlement. "Elijah has a family, 3 growing kids. It's only right you let them move into your spare bedrooms. You can stay in the master suite and manage the property for the family." My jaw clenched. A thick vein throbbed at my temple. After what they did to me 14 years ago, stripping me of everything and leaving me to rot in the winter streets, they dared to stand in my sanctuary and demand the keys. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a tantrum. I just looked at the massive smart TV screen mounted on the wall behind them. What happened next would destroy their perfect, fake facade forever. "Thank you for being here. Grab a warm glass of water, sit down, and listen to me tell the whole story. You see, to understand the sheer audacity of my mother's demand, you have to understand the kind of family I came from. We weren't destitute growing up, but we weren't wealthy either. We lived a solidly middle-class life in the suburbs of Boston. My parents had a messy divorce when I was young, largely over finances, leaving my mother with primary custody of Elijah and me. My dad, Robert, sort of faded into the background, paying child support but avoiding the toxic environment my mother cultivated. In our house, there was a clear hierarchy. Elijah was the golden child. He was handsome, athletic, and could do no wrong. I was the spare part. I was the quiet kid who liked computers and stayed out of the way. I accepted this dynamic early on. I never expected to be the favorite. I just wanted to survive until I was 18, go to college, and start my own life. I worked my fingers to the bone in high school. I got a part-time job at a hardware store the moment I turned 15. Every single paycheck, every birthday check from my grandparents, went straight into a college fund my dad had set up for me years ago. My mom was the custodian of the account, but the rule was simple. That money was for my education. By the time I was a senior in high school, I had $45,000 sitting in that account. It was my ticket out. It was my future. I didn't care that Elijah got a brand new car for his graduation while I got a pat on the back. I didn't care that my mom bragged about Elijah's mediocre college grades to anyone who would listen while ignoring my straight A's. I had my plan. I had my fund. The housewarming party was supposed to be a celebration of how far I had come. My business partner, Carter, was there. My college mentor was there. Even the CEO of the company that bought out my startup was mingling near the kitchen island. But the moment my mother and brother walked through that heavy mahogany front door, the air in the room changed. They didn't bring a gift. They didn't offer congratulations. Chloe, Elijah's wife, immediately started complaining about the drive and how hard it was to find parking for their SUV. I watched them circulate through my home, their eyes wide with poorly concealed greed. They touched the marble countertops. They inspected the high-end appliances. They looked at my life not with pride, but with ravenous hunger. And when my mother finally cornered me in the living room, surrounded by my closest friends and colleagues, to deliver her ultimatum about Elijah moving in, a profound sense of calm washed over me. It was the calm of a man who held all the cards. But to play my hand, I had to let the memory of the darkest night of my life fuel my next move. Let me take you back 14 years. It was a Tuesday in early February, the kind of Boston winter night where the wind physically hurts your face and the snow turns into a hard, dirty crust of ice. I was 18 years old. I had just finished a brutal 6-hour shift at the hardware store after a full day of high school classes. My hands were cracked from the cold, and all I wanted was a hot shower and my bed. I unlocked the front door and walked into the kitchen. The smell of cheap takeout hung in the air. My mother and Elijah were sitting at the dining table, totally engrossed in a sea of printed spreadsheets and bank statements. They didn't even look up when I took off my boots. "What are you guys working on?" I asked, grabbing a glass of water from the fridge. My mother kept her eyes glued to the papers. Elijah and Chloe are buying a house, she said casually. With the baby coming, they need a proper place. A 3-bedroom in the suburbs. That's great, I said genuinely. I didn't love Elijah, but a baby was good news. The problem is the down payment, Elijah chimed in, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. The bank requires 20% to avoid the extra insurance. We're short. I nodded, not really seeing how this involved me. Well, I hope you figure it out. I turned to head to my room. We already did, my mother said. Her voice was flat, totally devoid of emotion. We're using your college fund. I froze in the hallway. The glass of water in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. I turned around slowly. Excuse me? My mother finally looked at me. Her expression was the same one she used when telling me we were out of milk. Your college fund, Matthew. There's $45,000 in there. It's exactly what your brother needs to close on the house. You're smart. You can go to a community college for a couple of years, get some loans, and figure it out. Family comes first. My brain short-circuited. I couldn't process the words. That's my money, I stammered, my voice cracking. Dad set that up. I worked for 3 years putting my own paychecks into that account. It's for my tuition. Elijah let out a loud, obnoxious sigh. Don't be so dramatic, Matt. You're single. You don't have responsibilities. I'm starting a family. What do you want, your niece to grow up in a cramped apartment just so you can go to some fancy 4-year university right away? Yes, I shouted, the shock instantly turning into burning rage. Yes, I do. Because I earned it. You didn't save a dime, Elijah. You spent your salary on designer clothes and vacations. You can't just steal my future because you lack basic planning skills. My mother stood up, her chair scraping violently against the linoleum floor. Her face twisted into a mask of pure fury. Do not speak to your brother that way in my house. I am the custodian of that account, and I make the financial decisions for this family. The money is already being transferred. It's done. Felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Felt like I was attending my own funeral. My future, the one I had meticulously planned and sacrificed for, was gone in a single signature. You're a thief, I whispered, staring directly into my mother's eyes. You're stealing my life. She crossed her arms, her jaw set in stone. If you are going to be this selfish and ungrateful, if you refuse to help this family when we need it most, then you don't belong under this roof. You have a choice, Matthew. Accept this with a smile or pack your bags and get out. You're 18. You're a legal adult. Figure it out on your own. She was bluffing. She had to be bluffing. But as I looked at her, and then at Elijah who was smirking at his phone, I realized the horrifying truth. They didn't care about me. To them, I was just a walking ATM. An obstacle. I didn't say another word. I walked into my small bedroom. I grabbed my beat-up duffel bag and shoved whatever I could fit inside. Jeans, sweaters, my laptop, my chargers, and my important documents. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely zip the bag. I slung it over my shoulder and walked back down the hallway. My mother watched me from the kitchen. She didn't move. She didn't say a word. She didn't try to stop me. Elijah didn't even look up from his screen. I opened the front door and stepped out into the freezing Boston night. The door clicked shut behind me, locking me out of my childhood forever. The first night was pure adrenaline. I drove my 15-year-old Honda Civic to a 24-hour Walmart parking lot on the edge of town. I parked under a bright street lamp, hoping the light would deter anyone from messing with the car. I reclined the driver's seat, pulled my winter coat up to my chin, and stared at the frost forming on the inside of the windshield. I didn't sleep. My mind was racing, trying to calculate how I was going to survive. When the sun came up, the adrenaline crashed, and reality set in. It was a brutal, bone-chilling reality. Have you ever tried sleeping in a car during a New England winter? The cold doesn't just surround you. It seeps into your bones. It settles in your joints. No matter how many layers you wear, you can never get warm. You wake up every hour, your body convulsing with shivers, forced to turn on the engine for 10 minutes just to run the heater, praying you don't run out of gas because gas means money, and money was something I no longer had. For 2 weeks, that parking lot was my home. My morning routine consisted of driving to a cheap local gym where I had a $10 a month membership. I would take the longest, hottest shower I could stand, trying to thaw my frozen limbs. I washed my one spare set of clothes in the gym sink and dried them under the hand dryer. I stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark purple circles. My skin was pale and dry. I looked like a ghost. I couldn't go back to high school. I couldn't focus on calculus when my stomach was cramping from hunger. I dropped out of my classes and immediately started looking for full-time work. I landed 2 under-the-table jobs. In the mornings, I scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets at a rundown diner. In the evenings, I mopped the aisles of a discount grocery store. I smelled constantly of cheap bleach and stale fry grease. I lived on discounted bread, peanut butter, and whatever leftover scraps the diner cook took pity on me and threw in a box at the end of my shift. Every penny I made went into a secret bank account I opened at a different branch, terrified my mother would somehow find a way to drain that too. The physical pain of sleeping in the car was awful, but the mental isolation was worse. I watched people walking out of the grocery store, laughing with their families, carrying bags full of fresh vegetables and warm meals. They would look at me, the kid in the dirty jacket mopping the floor, and look away quickly, uncomfortable with the reality of poverty. I realized then how invisible you become when you fall through the cracks. My phone never rang. Not once. My mother never sent a text asking if I was alive. Elijah never called to see if I was freezing to death. I was completely, utterly abandoned. There were nights when the cold was so unbearable I cried until my tears froze on my cheeks. There were moments when the exhaustion was so heavy I considered driving back to that house, getting on my knees, and begging my mother to let me sleep in the hallway. But every time that weakness crept in, I remembered the smirk on Elijah's face. I remembered my mother's cold, dead eyes as she told me she stole my future. I gripped the steering wheel of my freezing car, my knuckles turning white, and made a vow. I would never, ever let anyone step on me again. I would survive this. I would build a life so strong, so untouchable, that they would never be able to reach me. The pain turned into a hard, cold knot in my chest. It was no longer sadness. It was pure, unadulterated drive. I was going to win even if it killed me. The breaking point came in my 3rd week of homelessness. I had managed to get a library card and was spending my afternoons in the university library downtown. It was warm, it was safe, and it had free internet. I was trying to teach myself basic programming from online tutorials. Figuring tech was my only realistic way out of minimum wage hell. One Thursday afternoon, the lack of sleep and the malnutrition finally caught up with me. I was reading a chapter on Python when the words blurred. My head dropped to the desk, and I passed out completely. I woke up to a gentle hand on my shoulder. I flinched, instinctively pulling away, expecting a security guard to kick me out. Instead, I saw a man in his late 50s with kind eyes and a messy tweed jacket. It was Professor Jonathan, a senior computer science lecturer at the university. He had seen me in the library every day for a week. "Son," he said softly, looking at my frayed cuffs and the dark bags under my eyes, "when was the last time you slept in a bed?" I tried to lie. I tried to say I was just studying hard for exams. But the exhaustion stripped away my pride. I broke down. I told him everything. I told him about the college fund, the car, the cold, the hunger. He didn't pity me. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just packed up my laptop, looked me in the eye and said, "You're coming home with me." Professor Jonathan and his wife lived in a modest house near the campus. They set me up in their guest room. I will never forget the feeling of those clean cotton sheets. I slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, there was a hot bowl of chicken soup waiting for me on the kitchen counter. For the first time in almost a month, I felt safe. Jonathan became the father figure I never had. He saw my aptitude for coding and started bringing me university textbooks. He let me sit in the back of his lectures. He told me, Matthew, your family might have stolen your money, but they can't steal your brain. You have a gift. Don't let their toxicity extinguish your fire. With a stable roof over my head, I finally had the mental bandwidth to plan. I got my GED. Jonathan helped me navigate the complex world of financial aid. Since I was independent and estranged from my parents, he believed I could qualify for heavy government grants and student loans to officially enroll in the university. We spent an entire weekend filling out the FAFSA and applying for private student loans to cover housing and tuition. I felt a spark of hope. I was finally taking control of my life. I was going to get my degree. A week later, the letters arrived. I opened the envelope from the private student loan servicer, expecting a contract to sign. Instead, it was a denial letter. Bold red letters stamped across the page. Application denied. Reason: severe delinquent debt and ruined credit history. I stared at the paper, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ruined credit? I was 18. I had never owned a credit card. I had never taken out a loan in my life. I didn't even have a cell phone contract in my name. My hands began to shake as a sickening realization washed over me. I immediately went online and paid a fee to pull my official credit report. The page loaded. I scrolled down, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the college fund. What I saw on that screen was a level of betrayal so profound, it made the theft of my savings look like a minor misunderstanding. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. I sat frozen in Professor Jonathan's guest room, the blue light of the laptop screen illuminating the horror on my face. According to the credit bureau, I had 4 active credit cards and a massive personal loan attached to my social security number. The total outstanding balance? $45,000. All of the accounts were severely past due, racking up insane late fees and penalty interest rates. I clicked on the transaction histories. The purchases were recent, starting exactly around the time I was kicked out of the house. Thousands of dollars spent at high-end furniture stores. Massive charges at a luxury appliance center. A huge down payment to a landscaping company. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. My mother hadn't just drained my college fund for Elijah's down payment. She had stolen my identity to furnish his brand new house. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to run to the bathroom and dry heave. It was a fatal stab from flesh and blood. They knew I was out there, sleeping in a freezing car, struggling to buy a loaf of bread, and they were actively destroying whatever future I had left so Elijah could have a leather sectional and a stainless steel refrigerator. I didn't cry. The sadness was completely burned away, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. I printed out every single page of that credit report. I put on my coat and walked 3 miles in the snow straight to the local police precinct. I sat in a sterile interrogation room across from a guy named Detective Hayes. I laid out the paperwork. I gave him my mother's address, Elijah's address, and a sworn statement. Hayes took one look at the documents, looked at my young, exhausted face, and sighed. Identity theft by a parent. Unfortunately, kid, I see this more often than you'd think. We have enough to arrest her by tomorrow morning. It's a felony. Hearing those words out loud, felony arrest, made everything real. If I pressed charges, my mother would go to prison. Elijah would be implicated as an accessory. Their lives would be ruined. A part of me, the angry, wounded kid, wanted to watch the police kick their door down. But then the logic kicked in. If she went to jail, the debt would be tied up in litigation for years. My credit would remain destroyed while the courts figured it out. I wouldn't be able to get student loans, rent an apartment, or even get a decent job with a background check. I looked at Detective Hayes. I want a deal, I said, my voice eerily steady. I won't press criminal charges right now. I will take responsibility for the debt and pay it off myself. Hayes frowned. Son, that's 45 grand. You're 18. You shouldn't do that. I know, I replied. But I need my credit cleared eventually, and I need this over with. I will pay it. But in exchange, I want this entire file, the fraud, the forged signatures, the IP addresses used to open the accounts, documented permanently in police records. and I want an ironclad restraining order against my mother and my brother. They cannot contact me, approach me, or use my name ever again." Hayes saw the sheer determination in my eyes. He nodded slowly. "I can make that happen, but you're taking a massive burden on your shoulders." I walked out of that police station with a mountain of debt that wasn't mine, but I also walked out with a weapon, a permanent legal record of their crimes. I knew, deep in my gut, that the day would come when I would need it. The next 4 years were a blur of sleep deprivation, caffeine, and relentless grinding. I was officially a full-time university student, thanks to Professor Jonathan helping me secure emergency grants, but my real life was defined by the debt. $45,000 at high interest. It was a monster that breathed down my neck every single day. I worked 3 jobs while taking a full course load in computer science. I did freelance coding for pennies at night, managed a campus coffee shop at dawn, and fixed broken laptops for students on the weekends. I didn't go to parties. I didn't date. I barely existed outside of work and school. Every extra dollar went straight to the credit card companies to pay off Elijah's luxury furniture. But my mother, the ghost of manipulation, wasn't done trying to ruin me. During my sophomore year, I went to file my taxes. I was expecting a small refund, desperately needed money to fix my overheating laptop. But the IRS rejected my electronic return. The reason? Someone had already claimed me as a dependent. I knew exactly who it was. My mother was trying to claim me on her taxes to get a larger refund for herself, essentially telling the government she was financially supporting me while I was starving and paying off her fraudulent debt. It was the ultimate slap in the face. I didn't call her to argue. I didn't yell. I went to the university's free legal clinic. A sharp-eyed law student helped me draft a brutal, terrifying cease and desist letter. We threatened her with IRS fraud investigators, citing the existing police reports regarding the identity theft. We sent it via certified mail, so she had to sign for it. I never heard a word back from her, but the tax issue was magically resolved 2 days later. That was the last time I ever dealt with her indirectly. The wall between us was now made of concrete and legal threats. It was during this dark, exhausting period that I met Carter. Carter was another computer science major, brilliant but chaotic. He came from a poor family too, always stressing about paying rent and buying textbooks. We bonded over cheap ramen noodles and late-night coding sessions in the library. One night at 3 a.m., as we were both staring at our miserable bank account balances on our phones, Carter slammed his hand on the table. "Man, these banking apps are built for rich people. They show you your investments and your portfolio. I don't need a portfolio. I need an app that tells me if I buy this coffee, I won't make rent on Tuesday." It was a light bulb moment. The frustration, the poverty, the constant anxiety about money, we could weaponize it. We decided to build a financial management app designed specifically for broke college students and people living paycheck to paycheck. An app that analyzed microspending, predicted overdrafts, and gamified saving pennies. We called it Senior Building. Sen became my obsession. It was my way of taking control of the financial trauma my family had inflicted on me. While other students were at football games, Carter and I were locked in a basement lab writing thousands of lines of code. I poured all my anger, my hypervigilance about money, and my technical skills into the architecture of that app. I was exhausted, stressed, and still drowning in my family's debt. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building a ladder out of the mud. The launch of Sen was slow at first. We pushed it out to the university network, hoping maybe a few hundred students would download it. But the algorithm I wrote to predict budget shortfalls was incredibly accurate. Students loved it. Word of mouth spread. By the time Carter and I graduated, Sen had 50,000 active users across a dozen universities. We didn't take corporate jobs. We rented a tiny, roach-infested apartment in the city, slept on mattresses on the floor, and worked on Sen 20 hours a day. We sought venture capital, faced dozens of rejections, and finally landed a seed round that let us hire a small team. The next 5 years were a rocket ship. The economy was tough, inflation was rising, and suddenly, we were the only Everyone needed an app to help them stretch their salary. San exploded. We went from 50,000 users to 5 million. We were featured in major tech magazines. We moved out of the Roach apartment and into a sleek downtown office. And then, the day my life changed forever arrived. We were called into a meeting with Mr. Anderson, the CEO of one of the largest fintech corporations in the world. He was a ruthless, brilliant businessman. He didn't waste time with small talk. He looked at Carter and me across a massive glass conference table and said, "Your user acquisition cost is the lowest I've ever seen. Your predictive algorithm is flawless. I want to buy San, and I want to integrate your team into our infrastructure." He slid a piece of paper across the table. When I saw the number, my lungs stopped working. It was an acquisition offer for mid-8 figures. Millions of dollars. We signed the paperwork 2 weeks later. The day the wire transfer hit my bank account, I sat in my office and stared at the screen for an hour. 7 figures. I was a multimillionaire at 29. The first thing I did wasn't buy a sports car or a Rolex. I logged into the loan servicer portal and paid off the last remaining balance of that $45,000 debt my mother had burdened me with. I watched the balance drop to 0. A physical weight lifted off my chest. A weight I had carried since I was 18. I was finally truly free. With my newfound wealth, I decided it was time to establish my roots. I wanted a fortress, a place that belonged entirely to me, where no one could ever kick me out. I spent months looking before I bought the house. $960,000 in cash. It was a sprawling, modern craftsman home in a high-end gated community, with 4 bedrooms, a massive kitchen, and a wraparound porch. It was perfect. As I walked through the empty rooms, smelling the fresh paint and the polished mahogany floors, a strange thought crept into my mind. I had won. I had survived the winter in the car, the starvation, the crushing debt, and the betrayal. I had built an empire from the mud they pushed me into. But the victory felt incomplete. They didn't know. My mother and Elijah were likely still living in their bubble of delusion, thinking I was a failure who had amounted to nothing. I realized then that moving on wasn't enough. I needed them to see exactly who they threw away. I needed them to look at my success and choke on their own regret. It was time to invite them into my web. Planning the housewarming party became my ultimate project. I hired the best caterers, invited my closest friends, my tech industry colleagues, Carter and Professor Jonathan. But the most important names on the guest list were Sarah and Elijah. Before I sent the invitations, I needed intel. I hadn't spoken to them in over a decade. I needed to know exactly what kind of situation I was walking into. So, I reached out to the one person who might know, my dad, Robert. We met at a quiet diner outside the city. He looked older, tired, carrying the guilt of a man who knew he abandoned his son when it mattered most. We ordered coffee, and after an hour of awkward apologies and catching up on my success, I asked the question that mattered. "How are Mom and Elijah doing?" My dad let out a long, heavy sigh and stirred his coffee. "Not well, Matthew. Not well at all. But they're hiding it." "Hiding what?" I leaned in. "Elijah is broke," Dad said, lowering his voice. "He lost his corporate job 3 years ago. His salary is gone. Instead of finding real work, he started throwing money at terrible crypto investments and day trading, trying to get rich quick. He wiped out his savings. He's up to his eyeballs in second mortgages on that house they bought. Your mother has been secretly taking out personal loans to help him stay afloat, trying to keep up appearances." I absorbed this information. The golden child had crashed and burned. "Does Chloe know?" I asked. Dad shook his head. "No. Elijah is terrified of her. Chloe comes from a family that cares about status. She thinks Elijah is just consulting and doing well. She thinks the money your mother gave them for the house years ago was a legitimate inheritance from a wealthy uncle. If Chloe knew the truth, that they were bankrupt and surviving on credit, she would file for divorce tomorrow and take the kids." A cold, dark satisfaction bloomed in my chest. They were living a lie, a fragile, desperate lie. "I'm inviting them to my housewarming," I told my dad. "I want you there too." He looked at me, realizing there was a calculated edge to my voice. He nodded. "I'll be there." I went home and meticulously prepared my living room. I hired an AV tech to install a state-of-the-art smart projector that dropped down from the ceiling at the press of a button. I synced it to a secure folder on my phone. Inside that folder were high-resolution scans of the police report from 14 years ago, the forged credit card applications, the restraining order, and the paper trail showing the exact transfer of the stolen funds to Elijah's joint checking account. I printed the invitations on heavy, expensive cardstock and mailed them out. I knew my mother wouldn't be able to resist. The sheer curiosity of seeing where the son she threw away was living would eat her alive. And I knew Elijah and Chloe would come because they couldn't stand the idea of missing out on a free party with wealthy people. The trap was perfectly set. All I had to do was wait for the flies to fly in. And that brings us back to the present. The night of the party. The house was full of life. Jazz music played softly over the built-in speakers. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with trays of champagne and appetizers. I was standing near the kitchen island, talking with Mr. Anderson and Carter, when the front door opened. My mother, Elijah, and Chloe walked in. The contrast between them and my guests was jarring. My guests were relaxed, secure in their success. My family walked in with a nervous, aggressive energy. Elijah looked bloated, his expensive suit fitting a little too tight, beads of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Chloe looked around the grand entryway with eyes that immediately calculated the square footage and the price tag. My mother just looked shocked. She stared at the crystal chandelier, then at me, unable to compute how the boy she abandoned in the snow was standing in a mansion. I walked over, projecting the image of a gracious host. "Welcome," I said smoothly. "Glad you could make it. Matthew," my mother managed to say, her voice tight. "This is quite the place. Are you renting?" "I own it," I said, taking a sip of my sparkling water. "Cash." Elijah let out a forced, hollow laugh. "Wow, tech money must be nice. Must be easy sitting at a computer all day while the rest of us work in the real world." I smiled, a shark's smile. "It has its rewards, Elijah." Over the next hour, I watched them unravel. Chloe drank 3 glasses of wine rapidly, loudly complaining to anyone who would listen about her cramped suburban home and how hard it was to raise 3 kids on a consultant's salary. She glared at my spacious, empty living room with pure envy. My mother, meanwhile, was doing what she always did, manipulating the narrative. She pulled me aside, trying to act like a proud parent in front of my CEO, Mr. Anderson. "You know, Matthew always had a good head on his shoulders. I pushed him hard when he was young. Sometimes tough love is the only way to build character." I felt my blood run cold, but I kept my smile locked in place. Tough love. That's one word for it. Eventually, the crowd naturally gravitated toward the center of the massive living room for a toast. I raised my glass to thank my friends, Carter, and Professor Jonathan for their unwavering support. As the applause died down, my mother stepped forward, placing herself right in the center of the room. She cleared her throat loudly. "If I may," she announced, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. The room went silent. She looked at me, then at Elijah, projecting the image of a matriarch making a grand decree. "Seeing Matthew's beautiful home today has made me realize how important family is," she began, her tone falsely sweet. "And seeing all this empty space, well, it just doesn't make sense. Matthew is a single man. He works all the time. But Elijah and Chloe have 3 beautiful children who need room to grow. They are struggling for space." She turned directly to me, dropping the sweet act, her eyes turning hard and commanding. "Matthew, it's time you stepped up for your family. We've decided it would be best for everyone if Elijah, Chloe, and the kids moved into the 3 spare bedrooms here. You can stay in the master suite. Elijah can manage the property for you. It's the least you can do after everything this family has sacrificed for you." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Mr. Anderson looked horrified. Carter's face turned red with anger. My dad, standing near the back, covered his face with his hand. Chloe stood next to Elijah, looking incredibly smug, crossing her arms as if the keys were already handed to her. Elijah puffed out his chest, waiting for me to bow my head and obey, just like I did when I was a kid. I stood there, looking at the three of them. 14 years of pain, of cold nights, of starvation, of crushing debt, all crystallized into this single moment. They really thought they still owned me. They really thought I was still that terrified 18-year-old boy. I didn't yell. I didn't get angry. I let out a low, genuine chuckle. "Move in," I asked softly, the sound carrying perfectly in the silent room. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black remote for the smart home system. "Mother?" I said, my voice dropping an octave, turning ice cold. "I think there's a few things Chloe needs to see before she packs her bags." I pressed the button. The lights in the living room dimmed instantly, and with a mechanical hum, the massive projector screen dropped down from the ceiling right behind them. The trap had snapped shut. The projector screen unrolled with a quiet, mechanical whir, casting a bright, harsh light over the living room. Every single eye in the room darted from my mother's demanding face to the massive display. I had synced my phone to the system. With a single swipe of my thumb, the first document filled the screen. It was a high-resolution scan of a police report. The header clearly showed the logo of the Boston Police Department, dated 14 years ago. My mother's face instantly lost all its color. The smug, commanding matriarch vanished, replaced by a pale, trembling woman who suddenly realized she had walked into a minefield. Elijah took a step back, bumping into the edge of the couch, his eyes wide with panic. "What is this?" Chloe asked, her voice sharp, squinting at the screen. She didn't understand yet. She was still operating under the delusion that she was married to a successful consultant who came from a respectable family. "This," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room, "is a felony police report, filed by me 14 years ago, right after I was kicked out of my childhood home in the middle of a Boston winter." I swiped my thumb again. The screen shifted to a series of credit card applications and a personal loan contract. I used the laser pointer function on my phone to highlight the signature line. "Take a close look at that signature, Chloe," I instructed. "Notice how my middle initial is spelled wrong? That's because I didn't sign it. My mother did. She used my social security number to take out $45,000 in fraudulent debt." Gasps rippled through my guests. Carter clenched his fists, taking a step toward Elijah. Mr. Anderson, my CEO, set his champagne glass down on the counter with a loud clink, his expression turning to stone. "You're lying!" my mother shrieked, finding her voice. Her pitch was hysterical, completely dropping her refined act. "This is a fabrication. You forged this to humiliate us." "I don't need to forge anything, Sarah," I replied coldly, using her first name. Felt empowering. Because the next slide shows exactly where that $45,000 went. I swiped again. Bank statements appeared. They showed the fraudulent loan being deposited into an account, and then an immediate wire transfer for the exact same amount. The destination account was highlighted in bright yellow. It was a joint checking account, under the names Elijah and Chloe. Chloe gasped loudly, her hand flying to cover her mouth. She stared at the screen, then turned slowly to look at her husband. Elijah was sweating profusely now. He looked like a cornered rat, his eyes darting toward the front door. "Elijah," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "That date, that amount, that's the exact amount of our down payment for our first house. You told me that money was an inheritance. You said your wealthy uncle passed away and left it to you." The word inheritance hung in the air like a bad joke. "It was a gift," Elijah stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "Mom gave it to us as a gift. I didn't know where she got it." "You knew exactly where she got it?" I snapped, my voice cutting through his lies like a knife. "You sat at the kitchen table and watched her tell me she drained my college fund. And when that wasn't enough to cover your luxury furniture, You watched her steal my identity. You built your entire life on my back while I slept in a freezing car and starved. The room was electric with tension. Professor Jonathan stood beside my dad, both of them looking at my mother with absolute disgust. My dad's face was red with shame and anger. He had known parts of this, but seeing the actual police reports, the forged signatures, the sheer magnitude of the theft, broke something inside him. Chloe was hyperventilating now. She was a woman who cared deeply about appearances, about doing things right. The realization that her beautiful suburban home, the foundation of her marriage, was bought with stolen money from an abused teenager was tearing her apart in real time. "You let me believe we earned that," Chloe cried, tears spilling over her mascara. "You let me sit here tonight and demand his house. Oh my God, Elijah, you're a criminal. You are both criminals." I swiped one last time. The final document was the permanent restraining order. I spent the next 4 years of my life working 3 jobs, living on ramen, to pay off that debt so she wouldn't go to federal prison. I addressed the room, but my eyes were locked on my mother. I bought my freedom. I built my company. I earned my salary, every single penny of it. You have no power here. You have no claim here. This house is mine. My mother was backed into a corner, completely exposed in front of incredibly powerful, successful people. Her entire narrative of being the selfless, tough-love parent was shattered into a million pieces. But narcissists don't apologize when they are caught. They double down. "I did what I had to do for this family," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Elijah needed a house. He had a baby on the way. You were just a kid, you had time to figure things out. A mother has to make hard choices. You should be thanking me. If I hadn't pushed you out, you would have never worked hard enough to get this house. I made you who you are." The sheer audacity of her statement sent a physical shockwave through the room. She was actually trying to take credit for my success. Before I could even formulate a response to that level of delusion, a voice boomed from the back of the room. "Shut your mouth, Sarah." It was my dad. Robert pushed his way to the front of the crowd. I had never seen him look so furious. He had spent his whole life avoiding conflict with her, taking the easy way out. But not tonight. "Don't you dare try to take credit for Matthew's brilliance," my dad yelled, pointing right back at her. "You didn't make him. You tried to break him. You stole the college fund I set up for him. You committed fraud. You are a toxic, abusive woman. And the only reason Matthew survived is because he is twice the man Elijah will ever be." My mother physically recoiled. Having her ex-husband dress her down in front of a crowd of tech millionaires was the ultimate humiliation. She looked at Elijah for support, but Elijah was too busy trying to deal with his wife. Chloe was vibrating with rage. She shoved Elijah hard in the chest. "Don't touch me," she hissed as he tried to grab her arm. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You made me look like an absolute fool. You brought me into this man's home to try and steal from him again." "Chloe, honey, please, we can talk about this at home," Elijah begged, his voice cracking. He looked pathetic. The golden child was tarnished beyond repair. "There is no home, Elijah," Chloe spat. "Our home is built on a felony. You lied to me about the inheritance. What else have you lied about? Is there even a consulting job? Are we even paying the mortgage?" Elijah flinched, and that tiny micro-expression was all Chloe needed to see. Her eyes widened in pure horror as she realized her entire financial stability was a mirage. "I want a divorce," Chloe said. The word dropped like an anvil. "I am calling a lawyer first thing tomorrow morning. I am taking the kids, and I am leaving." "You can't do that," my mother intervened, grabbing Chloe's shoulder. "We are family. We stick together." Chloe ripped her shoulder away from my mother's grasp. "Do not touch me. You are a monster. You stole from your own child. If you can do that to him, God knows what you would do to my children." She turned to me. Her face was flushed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Matthew, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know. If I had known, I would have never." "I know, Chloe," I said gently. My anger wasn't directed at her. She was collateral damage in my mother's sick game. Take your kids. Go home. Protect them. She nodded frantically, grabbed her purse from the entryway table, and stormed out the front door. We could hear the loud beep of her unlocking her SUV, followed by the screeching of tires as she sped out of the driveway, leaving her husband stranded. Elijah stood frozen, watching the door close. He had just lost his wife, his kids, and his facade of success in the span of 10 minutes. He turned to me, his face twisted in a mixture of hatred and despair. "Are you happy now?" he yelled, tears of self-pity welling up. "You ruined my life. You destroyed my family over some old money." Carter, who had been boiling with rage this entire time, finally stepped in. He walked right up to Elijah, chest to chest. Carter is a big guy, and he looked ready to tear my brother apart. "He didn't ruin your life," Carter growled, his voice dangerously low. "You ruined it the second you decided to be a parasite. Now, you and your mother are going to turn around and walk out that door before I throw you through the front window." Professor Jonathan walked over to join Carter, forming a human barricade between my toxic family and the rest of my guests. Mr. Anderson pulled out his phone, casually mentioning he had the security gate guards on speed dial if there was a problem. My mother looked around the room. She was looking for a single sympathetic face, a single person who would buy into her victim routine. But she found nothing except cold, hard disgust. She realized, finally, that her power was completely gone. She couldn't manipulate these people. She couldn't intimidate me. She straightened her cheap jacket, lifted her chin in a pathetic attempt to maintain her dignity, and glared at me. "You are a bitter, ungrateful child," she hissed. "You are dead to me." "The feeling is completely mutual," I replied, my voice calm. "Don't ever contact me again. If you show up here, I will have you arrested for trespassing. And if you try to pull any financial stunts, I still have every piece of evidence from 14 years ago. The statute of limitations might be complicated, but I have enough money to tie you up in civil court until the day you die." She didn't say another word. She grabbed Elijah by the arm and practically dragged him out the front door. They walked out into the warm summer night, two miserable, broken people who had finally faced the consequences of their actions. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind them. The silence in the living room was deafening. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I pressed a button on the remote, and the projector screen rolled back up into the ceiling, hiding the evidence of my painful past. Mr. Anderson was the first to speak. He walked over, picked up his champagne glass, and clapped me firmly on the shoulder. "Matthew, I always knew you were a tough negotiator in the boardroom. Now I know why. You're a survivor. Good for you for taking out the trash." The tension in the room finally broke. Carter gave me a massive bear hug, nearly lifting me off the floor. Professor Jonathan just smiled, a sad but proud smile, and squeezed my arm. The caterers quickly moved in to refill drinks and clear plates. The party resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just a housewarming anymore. It was a celebration of liberation. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the caterers had packed up their vans, I stood alone in my kitchen. I grabbed a broom and swept up a wine glass that had shattered during the commotion. As I dumped the broken glass into the trash, I realized I was crying. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. It felt like I had been carrying a massive, cancerous tumor in my chest for 14 years, and a surgeon had finally cut it out. I could breathe. I was safe. The adrenaline crash the next morning was intense. I woke up in my massive master bedroom, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange emptiness. The battle was over. I had won. But winning against your own blood leaves a complicated residue on your soul. I knew I couldn't navigate the fallout alone, so I booked an emergency session with Dr. Blake, my therapist. I had been seeing her since my startup gained traction, trying to unpack the hypervigilance and trust issues my childhood had caused. Sitting in her comfortable office, I recounted the events of the housewarming party. I told her about the projector, Chloe's reaction, my dad standing up, and the look on my mother's face. Dr. Blake listened quietly, taking notes. When I finished, she asked a simple question. "How do you feel, Matthew?" "I feel free," I admitted. "But I also feel a lingering guilt. Not for my mother, not for Elijah, but for the kids. My niece and nephews. I just blew up their parents' marriage. I exposed their father as a fraud. What kind of uncle does that?" Dr. Blake leaned forward. "You didn't blow up their marriage, Matthew. Elijah's lies blew up his marriage. Your mother's crimes blew up the family dynamic. You simply turned on the light in a dark room. The roaches scattered, but you didn't create the roaches." She was right. Logic dictated she was right. But emotions are rarely logical. "Those kids are going to suffer because Elijah is incompetent," I said, rubbing my temples. "Chloe is going to be fighting a messy custody battle. The divorce lawyers are going to drain whatever little money they have left. It feels like a funeral for those kids' childhoods." "So, what is your boundary?" Dr. Blake asked. "You have wealth. You have power. You want to help the children, but you cannot enable the parents. How do you structure that?" That session shifted my entire perspective. I realized my responsibility wasn't to save Elijah or fix my mother. My responsibility was to break the generational curse. I had to ensure that Gabriel, Caleb, and little Lily never had to sleep in a freezing car because their parents stole their future. I left Dr. Blake's office with a clear plan. I wasn't going to be the distant, vengeful uncle. I was going to be the safety net those kids deserved. But I would do it on my terms, with ironclad legal protection. I immediately called my corporate lawyer and set up a meeting for the following week. I had trusts to build. 6 months passed. The dust from the housewarming party settled, but the legal and financial wreckage left in Elijah's wake was spectacular. Through my dad, I kept tabs on the situation. Chloe filed for divorce immediately. During the discovery phase of the legal proceedings, the ugly truth about Elijah's finances was dragged out into the daylight. He hadn't just lost his corporate job, he had been fired for gross incompetence. He had spent the last 3 years funneling credit card cash advances into shady crypto schemes trying to hit the jackpot. Their beautiful suburban home, the one bought with my stolen college fund, was heavily leveraged with a second mortgage and a HELOC loan. The bank foreclosed on it. Elijah was forced to declare total bankruptcy. He was stripped of his assets, his pride, and his family. Chloe won primary physical custody of the kids, citing Elijah's financial instability and gambling-like behavior. With no job, no wife, and no home, the golden child had nowhere else to go. Elijah had to pack his cheap suitcases and move back into my mother's cramped, aging apartment. It was poetic justice. 2 narcissists, stripped of their money and their audience, locked in a tiny box together. According to my dad, they were completely miserable. Without me to serve as the scapegoat, they turned on each other. My mother blamed Elijah for being a failure and losing his wealthy wife. Elijah blamed my mother for coddling him and giving him bad financial advice. Their apartment became a war zone of screaming matches and bitter resentments. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered it cautiously. "Matthew?" It was my mother. Her voice sounded thin, raspy, and desperate. The commanding tone she had wielded my entire life was completely gone. "How did you get this number?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "Your dad gave it to me. Please, Matthew, don't hang up," she begged. "Things are really bad here. Elijah can't find work. His bankruptcy ruined his background checks. We are drowning in legal fees from the divorce. The landlord is threatening to evict us because we are 2 months behind on rent. Please, you have so much. Just a small loan. $10,000. Just to keep a roof over our heads." I sat in my home office, looking out the large bay window at my manicured lawn. 14 years ago, I was sleeping in a Walmart parking lot, scraping ice off my windshield, starving, while she bought luxury leather sofas with my stolen identity. "Alone," I repeated, a cold smile touching my lips. Like the personal loan you took out in my name when I was 18? I was desperate back then, she cried. I made a mistake. Please, you're my son. You can't let your mother become homeless. I survived being homeless, I said quietly. It builds character. You told me that yourself. Consider this some tough love. Matthew, please, I'll do anything. You already spent my college fund, Sarah, I said, my voice hardening into steel. I don't owe you a dime. Never call this number again. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked the number. I felt a brief flutter in my chest, a phantom pang of guilt conditioned by years of abuse. But it vanished as quickly as it came. They were facing the consequences of a lifetime of terrible choices. I refused to be their life raft. While I cut my mother and brother out of my life completely, I made a very different choice regarding Chloe and the kids. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, I invited Chloe out for coffee. She looked exhausted, carrying the heavy burden of single motherhood and financial rebuilding. But her eyes were clearer. She was free from the lies. I handed her a thick manila envelope. Inside were documents drafted by my corporate lawyer. What is this? She asked, looking at the complex legal jargon. These are irrevocable educational trust funds, I explained. One for Gabriel, one for Caleb, and one for Lily. I fully funded them. There is enough money in each account to pay for 4 years of tuition, room, and board at any university in the country. If they choose trade school, it covers that too. Chloe stared at the papers, her hands trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes. Matthew, I can't accept this. Not after what Elijah did to you. Not after I blindly benefited from it. You didn't know, I reassured her softly. And the kids are innocent. I know what it feels like to have your future stolen. I know what it feels like to panic about paying for textbooks. I will not let my nieces and nephews experience that. But there are strict conditions. I pointed to a specific clause highlighted in the document. The money is locked. It can only be disbursed directly to an accredited educational institution. Neither you, nor Elijah, nor my mother can ever access the principal or the interest. It is bulletproof. The cycle of financial abuse stops with my generation. Chloe broke down sobbing right there in the coffee shop. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. It was the start of a healing process for both of us. Over the next few years, I built a genuine, healthy relationship with my niece and nephews. I became the fun, supportive uncle. Because Chloe had primary custody, I didn't have to worry about running into Elijah. I attended their school plays. I took them to baseball games. My oldest nephew, Gabriel, reminded me so much of myself. He was quiet, analytical, and fascinated by how things worked. When he turned 13, he asked me how I built Sin. I bought him a high-end laptop and started coming over on Sunday afternoons to teach him basic Python. We would sit on the massive wraparound porch of my house, the sun warming the wooden floorboards, typing lines of code. One afternoon, he was struggling to debug a simple script. He got frustrated and slammed the laptop shut. "I'm too stupid for this," he muttered, echoing the toxic self-doubt my mother used to instill in me. I gently put my hand on his shoulder. "Hey, look at me." He looked up, his eyes frustrated. "You are incredibly smart, Gabe," I told him, making sure my voice held absolute conviction. "Coding is hard. It's supposed to be hard. But you don't quit when things get complicated. You fix the error and you run it again. You have a gift. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, tell you otherwise." Gabriel took a deep breath, opened the laptop, and found the missing semicolon. When the program finally ran perfectly, his face lit up with a smile that was worth more than every dollar in my bank account. In that moment, I knew I had officially won. I hadn't just survived my family. I had changed the trajectory of the next generation. It's a warm Saturday evening in July. I am standing on the deck of my home, flipping burgers on a massive stainless steel grill. The smell of hickory smoke and grilled corn fills the air. My dad, Robert, is sitting at the patio table, laughing loudly at a joke Carter just told. Carter, now the chief technology officer of a massive tech firm, is holding a beer and explaining the intricacies of server architecture to Gabriel, who is listening with wide, fascinated eyes. Professor Jonathan and his wife are relaxing in the lounge chairs, enjoying the sunset. I look around at this group of people. There isn't a drop of toxic blood among them. My dad is here, yes. We did a lot of work to repair our relationship. He apologized for his cowardice, and while I can't change the past, I chose to forgive him. He proved he could change. He showed up when it mattered. But looking at Professor Jonathan, who took me in when I was a freezing, starving kid. Looking at Carter, who built an empire with me in a roach-infested apartment. Looking at my nephew, whose future is secure because I chose to break the cycle. This is my family. I learned the hard way that blood is just a biological accident. It doesn't guarantee love, respect, or loyalty. Family isn't something you are automatically born into. It is something you build, piece by piece, through shared struggles, mutual respect, and unwavering support. 14 years ago, I drove away from my childhood home with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken heart. They tried to bury me under debt and manipulation. They tried to sacrifice my future to fund their fake, hollow lives. But they didn't realize they were just burying a seed. I grew in the dark. I built a fortress they could never breach. And when the time came, I didn't just protect myself. I set the record straight and protected the innocent kids caught in their web. I am 32 years old. I am at peace. And my house, my real home, is finally full of light. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, full of dark moments, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. We all have people in our lives who try to take more than they give, and standing up to them is never easy. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a toxic family member to protect your own peace? I really want to read your stories, so please drop them in the comments below. And before you go, I have a special request. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, you are part of a very special group. I want you to comment the letter W down below. W stands for winner. It's a secret code for the 1% Club. The incredible group of people who stick around, listen to the full truth, and understand what it takes to survive and win in life. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about navigating life, building success from scratch, and protecting your peace, please hit that like button and follow the channel. We are building a community of winners here, and I want you to be a part of it. Stay strong, protect your boundaries, and I will see you in the next story.